South African lion tracker and storyteller Boyd Varty is back on the podcast, fresh off a 30-day isolation in his tree house in the bush. This was a really beautiful conversation about the interactions of humans and nature. I can't wait to share it with y'all. This episode is brought to you by Zen Solar, zensolar.com, by Blue Blocks, blueblocks.com/amp, and by Onnit, onnit.com/Aubrey. So for any of you who heard the last podcast based on Boyd Varty's book, A Lion Tracker's Guide to Life, you'll see that Boyd not only does these things that are in a foreign world in a different way than we understand, like actually tracking lions on foot, tracking jaguars, learning how to read nature, but he has the storyteller's mind and the beautiful ability to be able to take those lessons, take everything that he observes and apply them to human nature so that we can all learn the lessons of a lion tracker, learn the lessons of someone who, like he just recently did, spends 30 days out there interacting with the natural world. And that's the value of this, to immerse ourselves in a foreign world and come back with the secondhand knowledge of the lessons and reflections of who we are when we're confronted with the mirror of the wild. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Up first is Zen Solar, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit about solar energy. So one fact, in a single hour, the amount of power from the sun that strikes the earth is more than the entire world consumes in a year. So there is power available beaming down to earth at all times. Solar is the way to capture that energy. And Zen Solar, 100% online solar company that can help you switch to solar power without the big onerous upfront costs. In fact, they'll even show you that the upfront costs can be literally nothing. Zen Solar basically just helps you create a swap. So instead of paying all of that money to your utility company, you start paying that over time for solar. And some other facts. Electricity rates in America increased by 3% a year on average and have doubled in the last 15 years. The average home with solar will save $37,000 in savings over a 25-year period. There's a bunch of other benefits. The federal government offers a 26% tax credit for installing solar. Zillow research shows that home values go up 4.1% and that solar improves the value of a home by an average of $15,000. There's a bunch of benefits, and with zero upfront costs, this is really a no-brainer. So if you own a home, check this out. Go to zensolar.com and just explore what solar can do for you and your family and your home. So once again, go to zensolar.com. Next, we have Blue Blocks. So one of the biohacks that is absolutely not debatable is keeping blue light out of your eyes when it starts to get dark. And the blue light comes from all the artificial light in our homes. Now, I write about this in my book, and pretty much every individual who writes about sleep writes about this, because the problem is that the blue light then actually triggers those daylight sensors in our circadian rhythm, which actually suppresses the production of melatonin, which is the hormone that helps us fall asleep. So eliminating, or at least restricting, the blue lights that you're letting wash over your eyes at night is going to have a huge impact. So that's where Blue Blocks comes in. Now, most of these blue light blocking glasses, they look, I don't know, like not that sexy, like not that sweet. Blue Blocks really took it to the best place possible and made these glasses look really good, feel really good, high quality, and just as effective as anything you will find anywhere else. So I highly recommend this product. It's phenomenal. Go to blueblocks.com/amp. That's BLUBLOX.com/amp, or use the discount code AMP for 15% off at checkout. Once again, blueblocks.com/amp for 15% off. And last up, we have Onnit, and we have a new product launch to announce. Now, many of you may not know that the very first product that Onnit created was New Mood. Before Alpha Brain, there was New Mood. And that was based on my own desire to create something that could support my mood, help me relax, help me decompress after, well, I was always someone who was kind of a hard charger. And New Mood was the formula that I researched and created with the help of all of the experts that I could gather to put all of the herbs and nutrients and vitamins into a single formula to help you just take a load off. But now, just like we did with Alpha Brain, there's New Mood Instant. So it's a delicious drink mix that you can mix right before you go to bed or anytime during the day. This isn't something that's going to make you fall asleep while you're sitting at work or something like that, but it's something that's really going to take the edge off and support your mood and just support you feeling relaxed. And actually, as one of my friends, Dr. Dan Ingle, says, when he takes New Mood, he wakes up singing. It just changes the way that you orient yourself to life. And now with the instant formula, it's really easy to transport. You can put it in your pocket. You can travel with it. And for those of you who don't like swallowing pills, it's a benefit there. And it just hits quicker. New Mood and any capsule takes about 15, 20 minutes to dissolve in the system. Instant is instant. You're going to actually start absorbing it right away as soon as you drink it. Plus, you get that extra water. So check it out. New Mood Instant is now available, and it's delicious and it's awesome. Go to onnit.com/Aubrey and you'll save 10% on New Mood Instant and everything else. Once again, onnit.com/Aubrey. And now an uninterrupted podcast with Boyd Varty. Boyd, my man, we are back.
1 year to the day almost.
Yeah, only because you came out to Austin to track the mythical Yeti.
the mythical 100-year storm creature.
the snow leopards in the Yeti.
It wouldn't surprise me the way it's looking out there. Yeah. As I said to you, I've already, with South African overconfidence, pranged a car into a ditch. It took me 72 hours from landing in Austin. So
we drove so slow over here on the way. And there was certain parts of the road where it looked like church parking, like everybody was there, but everything was backwards. So it's like some were sideways, some were upside down, some were up on the hill. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, it's like for love or money, you couldn't raise a tow truck. And, as we were saying, like it's kind of reliant on it getting warm again. Otherwise, things would start to get really interesting. Like if it was going to be cold for 2 weeks, I think a lot of people would be... We can get through a bit of this, but I can imagine it would get really interesting over time.
I would just come over and we'd start tracking animals. And
just get out there and live off the land in the suburbs.
Yeah, it would devolve into that quickly. So, man, what I want to talk to you about is just dive right in. You spent 30 days.
40 days.
40 days.
Yeah,
that's an even better number. 40 days in the wild. So tell us why you wanted to do this and what you were actually doing there.
Orb, there were a few moments. I've always had these things. I remember once at Burning Man, I was standing on the top of an RV and the whole scene is going on. And I was looking out into the dark part of the desert and I heard a voice inside of me say, "You should be out there." And there have been other moments all through my life where I was in a real social situation where something, wild was calling. And I've spent a lot of time in nature, but I have had this feeling my whole life that I can't fully know myself without really deeply symbolic encounters with being in the wild. And then, you start reading and there are over 40,000 accounts in the various spiritual texts and the mystics of the mystics going into nature. Mm-hmm. And so I started to become fascinated. Why is it?
Himself, 40 days in the desert.
And that's where the number came from.
Yeah.
I became fascinated by the question of why at a certain point in every transformational awakening is there this pull to go and be alone in nature? And so I wanted to answer that question and then, who's got 40 days to go and do that sort of thing in life? And then COVID, safari business shut down, my retreats canceled, and that voice was like, it's now, you got to go. And so that prompted it. And I thought it's going to be like this journalistic account. Like I'm going to go out there and I'm going to watch how my consciousness changes and I'm going to report back and kind of write about it, account for it in a very rational way. But what happened was something totally different. And one of the first things was
before you do that, give us your setup of where you actually are. So tell us how you set up your spot.
Yeah. So it's on the land that I grew up in South Africa, and I decided that I wanted to live in this tree, this big, beautiful, dark-bowed ebony tree on the sides of a river. And what there is there's a wooden platform up there, and so you can walk up this little rickety wooden ladder, and then you're up in the tree.
And then the Navi people have their hammocks and the home tree, and you made a bow out of the wood of the tree, and you form Sahelu with a flying pterodactyl.
I mean, but there's something like magical about living up in a tree. You're living in a living being. And also out there, the minute you get a little bit of elevation, you don't have to work so hard with keeping watch, that sort of thing. So the tree was up on the banks of this beautiful river. And then I took a couple of trunks with me, which were like dry goods, a lot of cornmeal porridge, which is what people eat in South Africa. And
like grits.
Like grits. And one of the things that I realized is like, you quickly know you're going out of a comfort zone where you find yourself asking new questions. Like, how long can I keep a cabbage in hot African heat? Like, what'll happen if a monkey gets onto my mosquito net? You're just like starting to explore the edges of like anything normal. So, I really felt myself starting to shift. And then, as I said, like, and you'll know this from your various, journeys into like retreat spaces, but what's fascinating about it is it's like your psyche knows. It knows that something significant is about to happen. And you might have an idea that I'm going to report on how my consciousness changes, but it will then start to bring things up with you.
Yeah. That happened. I mean, so I had a week-long ayahuasca retreat at the end of 3 weeks in Costa Rica. And the first 2 weeks, everybody's like, oh, how was Costa Rica? I was like, well, it was beautiful, but I had so much stuff coming up because my psyche knew that I was about to sit with ayahuasca for a week.
Yeah.
But I was just I was in ceremony, dealing with my own shit without any medicine for the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And I started asking, various spiritual teachers. I have this Zen guy who I talked to, and I said, like, I'm going to go be alone for 6 weeks, living in a tree in the wild. Like, how should I be approaching this? And he had said, the art form of retreat is to slip the bounds of normal consciousness and allow something to take you. And I didn't really know what he meant. And then I got back to South Africa and I spoke to my mentor, who's this incredible tracker who we've spoken about before, Renias Mhlongo. And he said to me, the way to do it is when you get out there, be an animal. Just be an animal. And I realized that one of the big limitations that I was carrying into this thing is the idea that I should know how to do this right to get the most out of it. And the real breakthrough was to let go of thinking I knew how to do it and let something more natural, like wake up when you wake up, sleep when you sleep, eat when you eat, be curious and just follow that and see where that starts to take you. And that was the kind of the key that I needed to like really set the experience up. Like, don't know how to do it, have no idea how to do it, and start to follow something else.
That's such like, I can feel the freedom wash over my own body when you talk about that, because we so rarely give ourselves that. We have all of these shoulds. I should do this, or I have to do this, or I'd look at my calendar, I could pop open my Google calendar. It's like, all right, this thing at this time, this thing at this time. Okay, I got this thing at 10:30, and that's important. So I got to get up by, this time so I can get this workout in and get this food in, and so I can get this thing. And everything is like based upon these certain events that are fixed according to time. But the animal doesn't have that. It just does what it feels it needs to do in any given moment.
Totally, just in a kind of intuitive arising. And, like, as I said, your psyche starts to know. The first book I opened while I was there, because I allowed myself to take books. The first book I opened was the account of a young pygmy boy from the late 1800s. Then was written by this kind of rogue scientist who was a morphine addict, but that's a whole different story. But basically, this young boy was taken from his family. He was blindfolded, and he was taken by circuitous route, by a train and vehicle, a route of about 300 miles, and ended up at a spot that was only about 60 miles from where he was taken, but distorted by a mountain range. And sometime during the night, he broke out and he walked on a direct line. When they tracked him the next day, he walked on a direct line back to his home. And when they found him there, they asked him, how did you know how to get home? And he said, he just kept repeating, I did not know where my home was. I wanted to go home. And there was that, and the scientist then described it as the capacity for purposeful action towards an unknown purpose. And as I'm sitting there in the tree reading that, I could feel that I was now becoming involved in the intuitive act of healing. Be like an animal, follow something. There was something that wanted to be healed through the experience of being out there that I didn't know what the end point of that was yet, but something in me knew the next thing to do, the next thing to do, the next thing to do. And I've been fascinated by there is a healing impulse in all of us, but we can't follow it while we're in the roles that we're in. And just being out there, it started to take me. And during those first few days, boom, one of my core woundings, which is, being taken off the land and put in a really wildly is the wrong word, like a cemented institutional boarding school where there was, I started to feel now that current of something that needed to be healed out of that.
Right.
So it was wild. And I think of the first few days out there as a kind of shedding, and there's dimensions to it. Like one, you now start sleeping at the frequency of the wilderness. So your circadian rhythm starts to change. You start to be affected by the light. You start to eat when you're hungry, and only when you're hungry. You start to be surrounded by aliveness. Your nervous system starts to get affected. There's the presence of wild animals. So all of this stuff is starting to work on you. Meantime, your psyche is starting to bubble up the things that are unhealed. And then there's this other, it's almost a funny piece, like wake up at 4 a.m, sit, meditation, journal, make some coffee, make a fire, make some coffee.
And you would go down from the tree.
Yeah, I'd go down from the tree. And I allowed myself to go out into the reserve, go tracking, come back from tracking, do yoga, breathe, read a bit more. 10:15. It's 10:15 and you got 39 days to go. Just yourself. So it's not going to be and that initially that's anxiety, it's anxiety producing,
right.
Okay, where does this go? And that mind of where does this go? It disappears after a few days, but in those first few days I was like, okay, so just me, 39 days, 38 days. And I could see myself shifting out of that consciousness, but it took about 4 days. And there's some anxiety in that too. I'm out of life, am I not attending to the things that I should be attending to? I'm out here living in this tree. And it took 4 days for that to kind of give way. And then I felt myself starting to shift.
I've been following Andrew Huberman's work, and he talks a lot about how there's ways in which the nervous system are ramped up for a certain speed. Mm-hmm. And there's a speed that we all live our life according to, and we're ready for that speed. And so when things slow down, we get agitated, we get anxious because our nervous system is ready for a certain pace, but the world is slow. So we're like, I'm bored, I'm anxious, and out in nature, when I went to Africa, that was the thing I noticed more than anything, more than all the animals, and which were great, and the people, which were great. A lot of things were great, but the thing that was the biggest difference was whoa, it's really slow out here. So much slower than my life back home.
Yeah. And if you watch the animals, and I kept watching the animals around the camp, buffalo around the camp, a herd of Inyala, it's like the perfect output of energy for the moment.
Right.
Slow movement, feeding in this totally parasympathetic state. And when they need the intensity, they have access to it, but they're never feeding thinking gotta get as much food in as possible today. There's a total rhythm to it. And I felt a huge nervous system change immediately. And then energy, when your nervous system starts to drop like that, it's almost like your chi starts to just build naturally. Yeah. Another funny thing about those early part of being out there is, just not looking at yourself. No mirror, no reflective glass, no thought every morning of how do I look? I've got a podcast this morning. I've got to meet some people. I was thinking what is helpful to ego dissolution on some level is to just stop looking at the identified physical self. A space literally opens up when that is not up every day. And so you stop being a version of you stop thinking about yourself and you just start being yourself. So there's a lot of little subtle things like that immediately start to work on you.
The only corollary I really have was my week I spent in the darkness retreat.
I know, I kept thinking about that.
Yeah, and that was very similar in some ways. There's no nature element, but there's absolutely the absence of clock. There's the absolute absence of reflection of self in
Yeah.
anything. And you really can't do anything. You can't even read or listen to music or write. Or I had a tape recorder that I could turn on that was blacked out, so I would talk to myself and record it, and hoping that I would get it, because I didn't really know if I was pushing the button right or not, or if I left it on and I, screwed up the battery or whatever. But I practiced a lot, so I had that. But there was not much else to do. I had a little Tupperware of nuts, and that was like my comfort thing. Like when I was just like nothing but empty space and silence and darkness, I was like, you can go eat some nuts right now. So I would reach for these little comfortable things. Did you find yourself like reaching for some aspect of comfort in that way?
I mean, you little things like I had a bag of oranges, and it's like fresh after eating cornmeal, that like 2:00 in the afternoon orange. I mean, chop wood, carry water. It was like I would select it out the bag. I would smell it, take some time with my knife to like peel it, throw the peel in the river. Yeah. I mean, eating an orange, but it's quite a lot to be said for doing one thing at a time.
Totally.
I mean, one of my insights was I could change my life, the quality of my life radically by just doing one thing at a time. Because, how simple.
So simple and so profound.
And I felt it hitting me like, just do one thing at a time. If I could offer one thing to the community, it was like, just try that for a while and see how things change. The quality of your relationships will change. The quality of your life will change. And I guess, that's the art of mindfulness, but just start with that. Just do the thing you're doing. Do it for the rest of the day if you're listening to this live and see what happens. I used to make a shower.
We say do it for the rest of the day. Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. Just try to do it at a couple times today. Try to just, like I have a Spindrift in my hand. I have it one time while I'm drinking the Spindrift. I love Spindrift. I haven't one time just drank the Spindrift. I've been drinking and talking, drinking and thinking, drinking and doing it. It's like the Japanese art of the Zen tea ceremony, where it's like the point of the tea ceremony is not about the tea. It's about being there with the tea completely, with how you heat it, how you pour it, how you whisk it, how you serve it. And that's the only thing that you're doing. And that's why they call it a ceremony. And to do that right is just the absolute surrender to the singular event that you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, the singularity of it. I mean, one other thing that comes to mind too, which goes sort of in this theme, is like on the third or fourth day, I put my shirt on and there was a hairy caterpillar in my shirt, and it just set my entire upper body on fire, like welts, burning welts. And I was like, you start to scratch, shit, fucking caterpillar. And then the more you scratch it, the more it starts to spread. I think like first aid, get in the first aid, because there's like an intensity to the itch is like a burn. Yeah. First aid, okay, didn't bring the antihistamine cream, antibiotic cream. I don't need antibiotic cream. Okay, this is bad. Close off. Run to the river, jump in the river, scrub myself with sand. No, this is making it worse. Run back there, antibiotic cream. Fuck it, that's all we got. Might as well be whipping cream, and then get into this like frenzied state of like being on fire and like almost like burning, almost hurting, and then realizing like this whole thing that I'm going through, it passes super quickly because there's no one else around to like hold the story of it with me. So, it could be into like, I'm such an idiot, and then like spend the whole day being like, but there's no one around. Or you bang your fingers, like closing one of the dry trunks. Like, this is bullshit. And then like, I mean, sulking is like really for the benefit of other people. Sulking, like mooding. In solitude, you just don't do it. There's none of that like, if I sit over here and brood, she's going to know that something's going on with me, and maybe she'll come over and say, what the hell is wrong with you?
Right.
And I'll show her without actually telling her that something's wrong. I mean, we just do these like, there's none of that in solitude, which is really quite amazing.
Dr. Ross Ellenhorn on the podcast, he used the word dramaturgy. Like we're in this dramaturgy where we're playing out this role, like we're in theater, and we do that around other people. Now we can do that with ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And you can get caught in your own dramaturgy, which is you playing a role for your own identity and your own internal self-judge that wants to look at you a certain way and think about that. But often we do it, with that kind of relationship with the audience, which is the other people. We are our own audience, but also it heightens dramatically when we have other people around us.
Yeah, I mean, I watched myself, I just watched those, like, so that I would say the first phase of it was like these little dynamics of physiological, some transformational out of a more identified state into more stillness. And then the next phase became, and I could feel myself shifting into it maybe 10 days in. I started to move into a kind of a tuning, and I started to feel the wilderness more. It's almost like my own, the psychological shit that wasn't necessarily valuable but was there started to move to the side. And there was a sense of now starting to be more tapped into this environment. And one of the things that happened there, which was interesting to me, there was a personalization to my knowledge of the animals around the tree. So if you had just gone out in your safari truck, it would have been like wildebeest, inyala, there's a bird up in that tree. But living there every day, 24 hours a day, it was this herd of inyala that moved down the side of the riverbank, that go and drink at that crossing point. These black-headed orioles that fly down the southern bank of the river and feed in the tree above me looking for grubs, and then at a later point in the day fly up the other side. And there was this sense of starting to be in tune with this very intelligent pattern of movement and aliveness around you. And I really started to feel that, where your attention goes, your life goes. You start putting your attention on an alive intelligence that is operating around you. It starts to pull you into more aliveness. It just starts to pull you into a sense of was moving around me. And then at the same time, memories really started to boil up. Boom. Sitting around the fire one night, I see my 10-year-old self. And one of the ways that the older boys would discipline the younger boys in the boarding house is they would make a passageway. They would stand in the passageway, and then you had to run down the passageway. And you just get smacked around.
It's like running the gauntlet.
Running the gauntlet.
American gladiators.
Totally. And when you're like,
you got Malibu with his fucking thing. You got
it's
people
just like, and I think about it now, like
Ryan knows what I'm talking about. He remembers Malibu.
I think about it now as like, knowing like the families that I know now. I mean, it was like, you're run down here and guys just slap you on the head. And when you're like a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old is a monster,
Of course.
So then like, boom, there's that little memory. There's, so just things from the past start coming up, and you start to see like, okay, how's that pattern me? And then like, okay, here comes, you want to cry after you get slapped around when you're 10 years old by a bunch of 13-year-olds, and the whole place turns and laughs at you because you're crying. And there's your first encounter with like real shame.
Yeah.
The feeling that the way you feel is not okay to feel that way. And so, and I'm looking at it, and then I'm looking like, okay, where's that in my own life now? Well, I control, every feeling. And I manage myself. And how does that manifest into my relationships now? So on the one level, I'm feeling myself start to be connected to this wild place. And on another level, I'm watching the psyche, do its thing. So it was, it was really, it was deep like that. And then to not go into a story about it, but just to trust, like, just keep letting this process go. Keep letting this process go. Keep seeing what you get with it.
Do you feel like the just kind of the quiet and the stillness and the gentleness in some ways of the way that nature handles your psyche allowed you to repattern some of those traumatic memories? Is that kind of why you're just slowing down and then being like, almost like nature itself through you is saying, it's okay. Like, let's go back in here and let's show you that it's all okay.
I mean, that is so well said, because the opposite of that shame of being laughed at by other traumatized kids who were in this school that was not a warm place, it was such a cold environment, is to be surrounded by an alive sentience that does not judge you at all. That and you start to feel it not as inanimate at all, alive, soft, present, intelligent. And I felt it was incredibly healing to a shame that had come from outside of me, to feel myself totally accepted, and to know that for thousands of years we lived out there in that state of no social judgment. We lived in small groups in an environment where there was nothing judging, there was nothing idealized. And I felt my psyche healing through being surrounded by that, through encountering that. And then also like just encounters with the magic of it, like a magic that would awe you. The one day there was downstream from the treehouse, there was a place where there was a V cut into the bank, and it was a crossing point for animals. They would come down there, they would cross into the river and then head to the other side. And it was maybe 9:30 in the morning. I walked down the bank and I walked into the river, and I had taken my clothes off and I lay down in the water, just beautiful clear water, knee deep. And I heard the sound just like whispering. And I immediately stood up, and it was coming from up above the bank. And what it was a matriarch elephant leading her herd, and they were coming down a game path, and the branches were touching the side of the elephants, and it was making the sound like just this like branches on elephant skin of whispering. And so I knew they're coming to the crossing point, so I quickly scampered up to the top. And as I got to the top, I encountered this matriarch who was leading the herd. And she stopped and she cocked her head. And for a moment, I just stood and let her get a sense of me. And I started talking to her. But, the feeling of elephants have like such a feeling. It feels like someone, banged a gong and the air is now vibrating. And you feel your adrenaline go up, but you also just feel like there's the field of energy just amplified.
Right.
And it's mid-morning and it's totally silent. And she's moving in slow motion as she assesses me. And I say to her, "Mama, I'm just going back to my camp." And I slip off to the side and she watches me. And I go up into the tree and the whole herd goes down and starts drinking in the river below. And there's something about an encounter like that just changes you, It changes you. It makes you believe in the world. You feel a certain kind of innocence in everything. And it's deeply healing to just be in a presence of another sentient being like that.
Yeah. Interestingly, I had a really deep ketamine journey ceremony. And in the place that I went to, ketamine is a really strong dissociative. I don't know if you've had any experience with like an intramuscular, big journey.
I have one. Yeah, it was terrifying.
It's intense.
Yeah.
And this place, it brought me to one of the most intense places I've ever been with that medicine. And in this place, there was nothing about me that remained. I was actually pretty convinced that, whoopsies, I went too far and I'm dead now.
Yeah.
But my mind stopped being able to form words and different things. And all I was essence. And that essence could only be described as like a tone.
Yeah.
Like if this was a note coming out of a didgeridoo or something, it was like I was a note and I was an essence and I had nothing left. I had no identity. There was no Aubrey. There was no body. There was no like aspect of self that remained. And it was just like I was this note. And it was interesting because I wasn't prepared for that. I was prepared. I wanted to at least think. I wanted to have some shred of that. But when I finished, I was like, oh, wow, that was like really beautiful to experience myself in the purest, inarticulate form of what I am.
Yeah.
Like what my energy is. If I went in and said nothing, let's say we were in the darkness or something like that, and you were just in the presence of me, this was the note that I was playing in that subtle energetics. And elephants, they have a note. And all the wild creatures, they have a note that they're playing in this symphony of God.
Yeah. And Ubuntu, the idea of Ubuntu is the idea that people are people through other people. But I think that definition has to be expanded, because in the presence of an elephant, you also touch something in yourself that is ancient and slower moving. And, here's a creature that has walked thousands of kilometers across wild terrain, and that energy translates. And when you touch it, you touch you touch something of what you are, and who you are, that can only be experienced relationally.
I've also experienced God. God's a tough word, and I understand there's been a lot of connotations and religious things. I always give that disclaimer when I use the word. If you prefer source or if you prefer universe, that thing it was shown to me as the all sound or the all light,
the audible life stream.
It's like the all sound. So we have that divine spark within us, deep in our center of centers, that spark of the all sound. So we have the sound of an elephant. We have the sound of a whale. We have the sound of a tiger. As we access our divine spark, which is all things, the all sound, we have that. And we have our own unique note as a differentiated being. So we are who we are because of everything. And that's why there's not a single thing, and so many different, ways to look at this, from the Hawaiian Ho'oponopono or the, Zulu Ubuntu or whatever it is. It's this idea like, you think you're separate. You want to look out there and say, that's not me. Wrong. Tatua Amasi, another, different part of the world that came to the same truth. I am that too. I am that too. What is it? Is it darkness? Okay, I am that too. Oh, is it amazing, brilliant, Christ energy light? Okay, I am that too. Whatever it is, like, we can find that in ourselves, and whatever we find in an animal, that's in us too.
Yeah, I mean, the Native Americans have, I think that's beautifully said. The Native Americans have this idea of sit spot. And the idea is that you go to the same place every day and you build a relationship with that place. You go sit in a place in your garden, you get to know that particular robin that comes there, how that tree is at different times of the day, the feeling of that tree. And on some levels, this was like a giant sit spot. And I thought I was getting to know the wilderness at a deeper level. I was giving myself the chance to know this wild place so I could know myself. But what started to happen is, instead of knowing it, every day that I was there, I started to feel more known by it. And inside of that, the feeling of belonging started to take place. I started to find my note in it and find my beat within it. And it became unmissable that somehow my presence there was more about being known than knowing, and feeling the way those stars affected me, and the way those animals around the camp, and the way that one chin spot batis would roost every night above my bed, and the feeling that the two of us were somehow roosting up in that tree. And that kind of connectivity it became very hard to ignore, and I started to feel like I came here to ask the question, why did the mystics go to nature? And what's becoming clear to me is that what this thing is a series of infinite interlocking intelligences, of which I am a part of, not in a conceptual way, but in a way that is so impossible to ignore that it's overrunning my sense of small self.
Right.
To like those various tunes in the cosmos, those tones. And I think that's why the mystics went, because it became impossible not to be with something else.
It's you asked that question, how did the stars affect me? But then you get in that deep mystical place, in that like the undescribable metaphysical understanding, and then you realize, and how am I affecting the stars? Yeah. And you start asking these questions like, wow, like this is, I am not a drop in the ocean. I am the ocean in a drop. Like, I am connected. I am affecting those stars as I look at those stars. Yeah. All right. Maybe I'm not pushing these giant suns that are blasting from billions of light years away in a material Newtonian sense. Like, I'm not beaming some laser beam out there but from that spiritual sense where everything is connected, I'm affecting the stars as the stars are affecting me. And then that starts to blow your mind, because then you think about what we're doing with the collective. We think, oh, what am I going to do in the world? The world's going through all this. You don't need to do anything but be. And by being something different, you're affecting the whole world.
Yeah, and the feeling that it was alive and it was intelligent. Now we were in a relationship in some way. Like the one day things are going great. I'm in a deep place. I feel the belonging. I feel that alive, soft, natural essence healing some of the places where I've held shame. And I go to dig myself a hole to do my toilet. And while I'm bent over,
You saved me that question by going
oh
here, by
yeah,
the way.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Just dig myself a nice hole there. Nothing. There's no leveler. Like a good shit in the woods. That just brings everyone down to the same level. Doesn't matter who you are. And I'm crouched over there, and a grasshopper jumps up and hits me in the eye. And there's this weird thing out there where you can also feel like the thing's just starting to turn on you. And suddenly, like I'm blinded in the one eye, so I'm trying to tourniquet. I can't see the weather, the temperature just starts to build. It just goes to like the devil's barbecue, just like heat just through the roof. Storm starts to build. And that night, I got hit by a thunderstorm that was just absolutely outrageous. At a time of year when storms should have been past, but that feeling of like, am I affecting it? Is it affecting me? Is this storm, is it happening somehow because of I need a particular type of initiation?
Right.
And I sat in that tree in a tarpaulin, and this monster rolled over me, just absolute monster. When the blades of lightning are coming down around you and you can smell the electricity, like a certain type of scent in the air of like ions charging, and you hear it go tick. You just hear tick as it touches down.
No, I don't know that.
When you are so close to it,
Yeah.
there's a little click as it touches down next to you. It goes tick, and then it goes doo. So, and the lightning goes first, and then the boom comes afterwards.
Wow.
And it was coming down all around me, and I was absolutely terrified. Like absolutely. And I like while it's happening, like I'm kind of getting into this place where it's like, this has to end because I can't handle this fear. Like I'm so afraid it has to end because I can't hold this. And it's not going to. Boom! And it's like sonic. And I thought to myself, it's rare as an adult to experience true blinding fear.
Yeah.
You think of like all the neuroses we live with, like all the neuroses, so different from white hot fear.
Yep.
And I felt like not only was it initiating me into how small I was, but as I integrated, like the next day I was like shaking, and you just wet, and that treehouse looks like Robinson Crusoe got shipwrecked, and shit's blowing everywhere, and frogs start calling in the tree above you, and like your all the hair is up on your arm. And the next day I was like, okay, this thing has showed me, like, it just showed me how humble.
Yeah.
It humbled me, and I got through it. So it gave me both my smallness, and it gave me a kind of strength. Like I can get through that level of fear. And it just like the wilderness itself just handed me two sides of myself, like a feeling of nothingness and a feeling of like confidence. Okay, we've been somewhere now. And when you go through those sorts of things, I just felt like those type of initiations, you become the sort of person who, that's what authenticity is to me. It's like when people meet you, they can feel that storm on you. Yeah. And they can feel this is someone who knows what it's like to be truly afraid. And it's no hiding from it. It's developing authenticity is having those experiences and going through them, working with them, being humbled by them. And I just feel it lives in you in some ways after that.
It's so valuable. And then you can absolutely feel it. You can feel it in everybody who's done it. And sometimes, this comes from, I think it's why I get along with MMA fighters really well. Yeah. Because, not necessarily the amateur fighter that just goes in and a little smoker and then goes to fight and is trying to show that they're tough. Like, it's cool. I was going to do that same thing too. I was training for a fight and different things happened, ended up getting into an actual fight, but totally different story. That's a different thing. But people at that high level where your reputation, your health, you're like everybody's watching you and you're walking alone into that cage, like facing that level of fear, whether you win or lose, whatever, like that, the person who's able to do that, they have a sense about them of like, I've seen some shit and I've gone through some, even the weight cut to get there sometimes, like all of these difficult, challenging things. And that's only just one aspect of it. Could be any different thing. You tracking lions and being in a tree in the middle of in a lightning storm, like all of these different aspects. For me, it's been all of the different challenging psychedelic journeys and going through that week in the darkness and, the long sweat lodges that feel like they're never going to end. And you're just praying that you're going to make it through to the end. Like all of these things, we need them. Like we need these things to become who we're potentially capable of being. We have to put ourselves in those disadvantageous, challenging situations for the initiation.
Purposeful action towards an unknown purpose. Don't know fully where it's taking you in the future, but you know that by having those encounters, something in you is starting to change. And it's not just the experience with your hardness, your ability to get through it, but it's actually how it opens you into more dimensions of self. The more time I spend in nature, the less bravado I have, and the softer it makes me. In some like physically resilient, capable of handling situations, but also softer to receive it, to feel more.
Mm-hmm.
I always think the movement
all
of the
armor
tracker
is brittle.
Yeah, it's
all of that.
Yeah.
That, like you said, bravado is the perfect word. It's so brittle.
Yeah.
When you're trying to be tough, it's hiding a deep insecurity that you're not.
Yeah.
And when you really are, you're so easygoing, so soft.
It's like those MMA fighters, they're never trying to show anyone they're tough.
No.
Yeah, it's just, it's there. On one of the, the whole way through, there was this theme of purposeful action, homing towards an unknown purpose. Like, what is that? What is that knows? And towards the end, I had this experience where I was in the mushrooms, and late evening, and a long way away, like I was on a ridge line, I was looking out over the wilderness. Some distance away, a lion roared, a single male lion. And I immediately got a bearing on it, and I started to head towards where the estimation. When you've got a little bit of altitude, you have a sense of it, right? But the minute you get down into a thicket, something different, it's hard to keep any kind of vector.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was feeling a different sensitivity in myself, and just kind of following my feet, letting my feet just take me almost on a different sense, and popped out into this clearing in the late evening. And I expected, like, this is where the lion would be. No lion. Okay, well, it's a difficult thing to do. And I'm standing there in the late evening light, and out of the long grass, this male lion stands up like 40, 50 meters away. Mm-hmm. He stands up and looks at me. And there was just a feeling that a sensitivity was being established. I mean, firstly, it was like,
I did it.
Beauty. And just like the way he stood up out of the grass, this like gold mane. But more than that, the feeling that a different kind of sensitivity was taking root. I'm really interested in living like that all the time. And maybe that was the second like dimension of the mystic, is something in you knows. Something in you knows what to do, that is deeper than rational knowing. In the same way that at a certain time of day, a leopard walks up and just starts moving in a certain direction, something in you knows. And I'm interested in different ways of knowing, and I would love to, find out what the guy you were referencing, the neuroscientist, says about I'm interested in different intelligences, I guess, and feeling how they come into our lives and where we operate from.
I think, the interesting thing is, I think letting scientists like Andrew Huberman, who I was mentioning, have these felt experiences first to like feel it, because that's where the gnosis comes from. That's where something is happening. And then from there, then they can apply their tools of scientific inquiry to figure it out, because there is a bridge between science and mysticism. It just maybe hasn't been established yet, but I have no doubt that there's a way that, that can be studied or analyzed. But first you have to get the best of the best, these scientists, to feel it. And the experience that you're describing, for me, I haven't gone on these long nature walkabouts, but we started working with Tim Corcoran with our Fit for Service community, and we go out on what he calls soul wanders.
Oh, I was just hearing about this, yeah.
Yeah, and so in the soul wander, you do exactly that. you just let your feet and let your instinct and let your knowing take you on a journey without any thought about where you're going, what you're going to accomplish. You just go and you observe and you listen and you try to find. And it's amazing what people have found. I mean, we did it out in Sedona, we did it in Tahoe. Everybody had some radical encounter with something. For some people, it was a tree. Some people, it was a shrub. One person in particular, Will, he got between a mother bear and her cubs and was like literally in that place. And he was telling this story. I remember, I feel like such a dick. He was telling the story. He's like, I was in between this mother bear and these cubs, and she was like making all the aggressive sounds, and I didn't know what to do. I was like, bro, you're exaggerating. And then he's like, and so I took a video. And he shows me, and over here to his right is a mother bear, and over here to his left are the cubs. And I was like, oh man, you just revealed that I'm an asshole. And you were exactly telling the truth about what happened. But in so many of these instances, people finding these pictographs on the thing and a spear point in this one spot and all of these like radical things where they were just guided through this series of incomprehensible, little signs. Well, this thing was here and I saw it pointing this way. So I decided that was a meaningful sign. And I went there, even though there was a bunch of other signs that I ignored, and everybody wound up in something really interesting. And you don't even need to be in the wild. I've done that in cities before. Where I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to go. And I'll find a cool shop or I'll find a cool park with a statue that I'm like, wow, that statue's fucking incredible. It's amazing what's possible when you just let those unseen, our unseen connection to all things be the operating force.
Yeah. And, even like with ceremony work, any idea you have about how it should go starts to take you out of how it wants to go and how it, but working with people now, we really, the idea of helping people cultivate the way of the tracker, it's exactly that. If you open to the symbolic dimension and ask nature to teach you, its consciousness instantly starts to affect you and starts to symbolically place things in your way, alive energies, presences that will affect something deeply in you if you know how to do that. And it's just more interesting to live relationally like that, to live in those encounters and to open up the space for imagination, it just starts to happen when you're out there. A more enchanted, I think of so much of the mission of those who are in the village consciousness trying to wake up in a different way is to re-enchant ourselves. The re-enchantment of the world, to go out and say, nature, teach me, show me today, show me your magical way and show me something for me inside of that. And as that starts to happen, the relationship with nature starts to change. And we get out of the mechanistic, technological, space-occupying frames of content-driven life, convenience-driven life, into something that asks for much more wholeness and starts to pull us into it, Just the capacity to imagine with nature and see what it gives us. That's a magical life on some levels.
And I think people find the resistance to that because, as we were talking about earlier, our nervous system is ramped up and it's ready for things coming at 60 miles an hour. Yeah. And so anything that's not coming at 60 miles an hour is boring. So you have to, if you're out doing something, well, you'll reach to your phone and you'll be scrolling Instagram while you're out in nature. You'll be doing something because you have to keep that pace up for your nervous system to find a chord and to find resonance with the vibrational frequency. It's like you're playing some 150 beat crackhead techno, in your song, and then someone's playing some slow jazz and you're like, no, that doesn't work for me. So but it takes a little while. You have to give it time to drop in. And that's why people who have they like to go camping. They always like to go camping. And then some people never go camping, right? It's very rare that you just occasionally, oh yeah, I've been camping once or twice, maybe. But most people, once you get into it, you realize, okay, you got to go for a week. Yeah. You got to spend 5 days, drop in, and then the magic happens where everything is beautiful.
Reverence cannot happen at high speed.
Right.
It cannot happen at high speed. And there's also this strange thing, I think about, I used to have this nightly shower, which was not a shower, but I would get the fire going. I would go down to the river, fill up this big cast iron kettle with river water. It has this beautiful, metallic smelling water. put it on the fire, the smoke would like run over the kettle and you'd get like the smoky scent to the water, and then go up into the tree, stand in this little bowl I had and pour this warm kettle over my head. That's the best shower I've ever had in my life. And you're like tangibly connected to it. There's also there's like one of the ways meaning flows into life is when we are in very physical, tangible ways in tune with our life. And when you start to get more and more disconnected from that, you spent the day in some binary realm via a screen. Like a lot of things happened, but nothing actually happened. And that's another point where it's like something is missing, but you don't know what, because you did your job, you did your work, everything went, everything was fine. You got to work, you got back, but on some level, nothing happened. It all happened in some realm out there.
Right.
And we need a more alive life around us to feel meaning in it.
Yeah.
That came through super, super strongly.
I
being
bet.
like physically engaged with life.
One of the practices that can help with that is like the cold plunge.
Absolutely.
At the point that your body gets in the frozen cold, like at that point, you're alive and you're wild again. Because there's no
missing it.
There's no option for anything else. Like that cold hits your skin and you're immersed and your heart rate starts to change and your breathing starts to change and you start to hyperoxygenate and you have to get yourself in accord with this strong environmental force that is affecting you, and you have no choice. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about it is like all of a sudden you're back in harmony with your wild side because you had to be. You had no other option.
It switches on a very physical encounter with life, which has to happen. We need more of it. We need more of that. Otherwise, something's missing and you don't know what. There's a longing. And I've thought for a while now that some of the depression and anxiety that we're seeing, it's just undiagnosed homesickness for that feeling of being tangibly connected with the alive presence of nature around you, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of being a part of those interlocking intelligences. And it drops you into this place. You just think there's something so fundamentally wrong with you, but it's not. You just need to tune yourself back in to that other place.
Homesickness is such a beautiful word for all of these maladies that we face. Because you look at it and you look at, I think the work by Holt Lundstadt and then, Vivek Murthy, the former Surgeon General, and they talk about loneliness and all of these different big studies and analyses of all these different studies. They found that loneliness is the number one predictor of early mortality, all cause mortality. So people who are lonely are more likely to die of any cause and also have all of the depressive, different psychological conditions that also exacerbate that. But loneliness is not determined by how many people are around you. It's determined by an innate perception. It's your own idea of whether you are lonely or not. And so you can be completely by yourself, but not lonely. When you're connected to the wild like that, like you're not lonely, even though you're not around anybody.
After the first 3 or 4 days, when the mind gave up that like natural kind of resistance when you're getting out of normal life, once that passed, there was not a moment of loneliness. No, no sense of being unmet in some ways. In moments there was like, there are things about this I would like to share, but it didn't come with the feeling that I've walked with in my life of being somehow different, somehow that feeling of being somehow outside of things, that people who long to live differently sometimes carry with them.
Yeah.
It was like a balm of the fullness of connection flowing into you. And towards the end of it, I felt like the fundamental abandonment of being pulled as a 10-year-old off the land, locked in a dormitory, beaten to a pulp. I felt it giving way to like what that trauma had given me, and the feeling that I was taken from the wild, but that was also what gave me the longing to always go back to something wild in myself, and to be there with it. It was just offered on levels that I couldn't possibly have imagined.
Yeah.
And so it healed. It was a healing in and of itself. My journalistic review was gone. and I was, being given something every day out there.
I had a question I did an IG live yesterday, and I had a question for someone who's like, I just can't seem to find, my friends. I can't seem to find my tribe. I can't seem to find people to connect with, and I feel really lonely. And, my suggestion was that, one, all right, there's ways and strategies to go meet these different individuals and go find your friends. I mean, it is a big impetus for why I created the Fit for Service Academy, the online app, places where people can meet of these similar mindsets and find resonance and accord with people. But that's not fully necessary to not feel lonely. Like, you can find that connection to nature itself, to the divine, to the Mother Earth, to, your own self, which contains all of that. Again, the ocean in a drop. Like, you can find that connection so that you don't feel lonely even when you're completely by yourself. And that's, I think, a great place to come from, because it requires nothing. And then when you're in that space, you'll find that you're naturally attracting, so many other people who want to find that. It's like you've found your way home. And so everybody else looking for their way home, they're going to be like, hey, you found your way home.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, I did. I can show you. And then all of a sudden you have many brothers and sisters of the way who are joining in the same journey to go home.
I don't think that, I don't think you find your community and get connection. I think that you start to find connection, and then your community comes. You know what I mean? It's everything in the mystic is backwards, right?
Yeah.
It's like St. Francis of Assisi walks into the town square, takes off the robes of his rich merchant family, and says, I renounce everything. I'm going to be alone out there. I'm going to go and find a connection just by myself out there. Okay, here's a renunciate that, hundreds of thousands of years later, I don't actually know when he was, is still the number one economic driver of Assisi. That's why people go there. And here's a renunciate who went to be alone in the woods and started, the deepest movement towards compassion, towards self and nature and the magic of the poor. So it's backwards in the mystic. And I kept thinking about it because I was doing these daily recordings, which have been released now as a podcast. And it's like, I spoke to more people too, in some ways, because that, people have been listening to that. I went to be alone, and in some ways I spoke to more people during that time than ever before. Everything's backwards in the mystic.
Yeah.
So, you start to find connection wherever you are. And it won't come from people. It starts inside, and then the rest starts to flow to that,
Yeah, really, really well said. I was a teacher that Anahata Ananda, who I work with out in Sedona, and whenever somebody has, an issue or what they're looking for, she always flips it and she reverses it in like a really, like, that's the shamanic way to like look at the other side, and from that's the mystical approach, So it's like, I'm here for, what's your intention? Love. Okay, breathe into the places where you have grievance. Breathe in. Like, it's always like, it's like you don't look straight at the thing. Like, let's go to the opposite of that, or the judgments. Like, all right, breathe into your judgments.
Yeah.
And then you'll find as you go through that, through the thicket of that, you'll find on the other side is exactly what you're looking for. But if you just go for that, love, 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 well, maybe you'll get there, but the mystic way is to go the other way.
It's always in reverse with the frickin' mystics.
Yeah.
Same. Buddha goes to the grove, and the people. It's only when he goes to be alone that everyone starts to come, and a whole movement starts from that. It's just all backwards.
Yeah, I want to go back to shame a little bit, because this is a very human thing to hold this shame. Because like you see on these animal shows that, an animal will challenge the alpha, whatever. It could be a ram, it could be a bear, it could be whatever. But you challenge the alpha for, control of whatever pack, and one of the animals loses. Now, in our world, shame, there's like a lot of shame. If you go and challenge and you lose, then you have the shame, and then people are like, oh man, he lost. And you have to deal with this whole thing. I can only imagine that animal, maybe they're a little hurt, they physically, they shake it off. But they can't carry that level of shame where they're thinking in that story like, oh man, I'm such a bitch. I could have had him, but I didn't. And now look at me. What am I? Some beta antelope? Like, how pathetic, just sitting around beating themselves up like we would, It doesn't happen. They're just on with the next thing.
I mean, so what is that environment? Well, firstly, it's a wordless environment. So there is no verbal mind. So when you go into it, it starts to pull you out of the verbal. And when it starts to pull you out of the verbal, just like would happen in a ceremony, there's a dissolution, and that starts to pull you into more oneness. It just naturally happens. There's the density of verbalness in nature is not there. So the animals exist in a state of pure presence. And even our language of like what's going on in that encounter starts to break down. Like, here's a lioness is feeding, and the cub comes over, and the lioness growls and swipes at the cub. And the people on the safari truck go, that lioness is so mean to the cub. So here's our verbal projection onto it. And what I see is the maintenance of harmony, an energetic maintenance of harmony. So the alpha now, he's the winner, and this one is lost. Or there's just a movement of energy towards more harmony. And harmony, my definition would be everything is uniquely itself. And in being itself, it belongs to the whole symphony, to your point, the tone. And so if we're lonely, we're not fully ourself yet, because the more we become ourself, it becomes impossible not to belong. Different, not the same, not imitating, not emulating, not perfect, whole as ourself. And then we're in the beat, we're in the beat as our perfect tone within it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you see lions. I mean, I think we spoke about this last time, like, oh man, they're just not lying around thinking, we could have got that buffalo yesterday. What is wrong with this team at the moment? You guys aren't performing,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's none of that. There's rest, then intensity, then feeding. They all smack each other around, then rest again, bonding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so many of the ways that we act are so human in the way, which is very traumatizing. The way that we hold these emotional states, even states of like when we're trying to punish. It's not just like the lion mother. Just like like stop, like, and then it's over. It's not like she's holding some like vengeance or something. Gone. It's just quick and then done. And so there's nothing there. So. We just got new kittens, and that's what I'm talking to my wife Ilana about, and she gets it, But like it's people are like, you can't scold a cat. I'm like, of course, yeah, you can't do what you do with a dog, which is if they go pee on your shoes, grab them by the scruff, put their face in the pee, and say, bad cat, bad cat. Like,
it doesn't work.
That doesn't work. They don't get it. But in the moment, if you hiss or growl, or like snarl or make a sharp sound, and then it's over. And then they'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, got it. And then that's like, that again, it's just a way to create harmony so that then you're not holding all of that anger of like, can't believe this cat's doing it. Just be there in the moment, let it know, and done.
And imagine if the boundaries you create in your house are not you asserting yourself or having to get the kids in line, but just the maintenance of harmony. That's how do we maintain it. And there's also clean pain and dirty pain, right? Clean pain, the lioness snarls and slaps, the cub backs off, maybe catches a little clip, it passes. Dirty pain is the story of my lioness mother never loved me. This always happens to me. I get rejected at the kill. That's,
and my sister didn't get smacked, and I got smacked.
Suddenly we're in, and we all do that. So how fast can we, just let things unfold?
Let go of our stories.
The stories, man. That's the core of it. What story are we telling? What story are we telling? And what's under it?
And retelling, and then getting back into that wild experience of it. and just seeing it without all the stories. I think that's really important. And we have to be careful. We're never going to be able to not tell stories. We're a storytelling creature. That's one of the ways that we cognitively process the whole world. But being mindful, being the observer, being the tracker of the stories. Like, can you track when you're telling a story and what your story is and call it what it is?
Yeah.
And then that way it gives you some agency to realize, I could have a new story. I remember, man, in the middle of my ayahuasca, so there's 2 days of drinking ayahuasca, 1 day of rest, 2 days. There was something that came up from ordinary life, from back home.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the medicine always working, I developed this story. And this story was, this person betrayed me. And I can't believe they're doing this. I was so like worked up about it. Eventually called, a mutual friend who's also a medicine man. And he was like, yeah, man, I hear your story here, but I think there's a different story. I don't think that story is the same story that I would tell. And I was like, okay. And he told me his interpretation.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, that story is so much better. That's such a much better story from my life. All of this anxiousness and all of this neurotic energy and frustration that I was feeling just by shifting timelines to a different story. It doesn't even matter which story was true. Maybe mine was right. Maybe his was right. But by me living in his story, I got to rest. I got to enjoy my dinner. I'm still holding on to his story because you know what? It's a better fucking story.
Yeah. And why not choose the story with less suffering?
Yeah,
I was even joking, like, I crashed our buddy's car in the Boston snowstorm. So like on one level, it's like, here comes the story of you're an idiot. You're a South African, you're driving in a snowstorm. Who do you think you are? You're always too overconfident. You always just want to push it. You were trying to get to a meeting, and so there's that story of like idiot Boyd, boosts his buddy's car and puts it in a ditch. And then here's like the real story is like the car slipped. It hit a cement girder, which broke, which means I didn't go in a ravine. It stopped. 5 people came out and said, are you okay? We're here for you. Do you need to use our phone? Do you need to, what do you need? Can we try and help you in any way? The entire like universe showed up to say like, are you okay? Can we help you? No one was hurt. Everything was good. What do you choose?
Right.
In reality, a car had slipped off the road and everyone was trying to be nice to me and help me.
Yeah.
And I could have lived, lying in bed, wave of shame 4 days later. You always push it too hard and, you always, whatever. It's the story.
And we think that it's productive. We think that it's productive because if we punish ourselves severely, we'll learn the lesson.
Yeah.
And then that's what's necessary. But it actually doesn't work. It's like a maltrained, like non-adaptive part of our brain, because when we punish ourselves that severely, then we, instead of learning, the lesson, which is important to learn and reflect and be like, okay,
yeah,
duly noted. However, when we punish ourselves that severely, we have the shame, and then the shame is like a blindness where we don't want to look at it. Yeah. So we eventually find all these excuses and rationalizations, and it actually blocks our awareness of seeing what was actually happening because we're so afraid of the judge that we're always like you would when we were in school and you're going to the principal. You're coming up with all kinds of excuses. Or if you're talking about a speeding ticket, you're like, well, at this point the sun was here and then the light was here. You're fucking coming up with all these rationalizations. Like, nah, I just like to go fast. Yeah. Like, that's the truth. But when you have a strong, overbearing judge in your own mind, you're going to start wiggling around and waffling and creating all these rationalizations and justifications for everything because you can't bear that oppressive pressure of your own internal judge.
Yeah. And the other thing I guess that I saw out there in the tree is like when I'm unaware of the shame that I'm carrying, and because it's shame, I don't want to feel it. It starts to drive me, in unconscious ways. Like I want to distract myself so that I never have to feel that. And when I finally slowed down enough out there to look at it and let it arise and let myself feel it and experience it in an environment that could actually hold it, it doesn't have the charge that it, and there's nothing like a feeling of connection that lets that stuff move and then doesn't hold us like it used to. And that is the core of inner work, letting letting the parts of ourselves that we don't want to come up, being aware of them, and then letting them move.
Yeah.
And nature will naturally take you there.
Yeah.
Nature will naturally take you to a different speed. Nature will naturally change your immune system, your nervous system and your immune system. Nature naturally creates community when we go out there together. We run this dudes retreat, and the guys arrive on the retreat. We spend a few days tracking. On one of the days, we go out and we sleep on the ground together. And this amazing feeling as night is falling, and it feels very ancient, archetypal. You get the fire going, group of guys close in, lions are roaring, a big elephant bull walks past. It's happening, and now it's getting dark. And dark is not something in the monkey starts going like,
Sure.
Here we go. And the group it's a transformational group. So guys have been doing their work, but that night you sit around the fire, you keep watch for each other, and in that like 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. darkness, owls calling around you, a leopard calling and then calling closer and then calling closer. Something happens during that night. The next morning, the group is in a radically different place with each other. They've sat for each other. They've kept each other safe through that night. And the next morning, it's like guys who've come from different walks of life, the banter is happening. The bullshitting is happening. But also, like, without it needing to be facilitated, we're at a deeper level with each other.
Yeah.
And I just think the natural world is you can't really beat it for that.
I think that what you're talking about with that banter and that kind of, I mean, we get that in sports. And I think that's like one of the things that I love so much. Like I have this huge release when I go play basketball or play like especially a contact sport where we're getting in and, we're talking shit. And sometimes, sometimes it gets heated out there, you know, but at the end, I always feel closer to the person who I got into it with than I did before. Even if it gets, rough, like we're arguing over a call and we start hitting each other and it's like, not with our fists, but like bumping each other and like really going at it. And then at the end, there's like this like, oh yeah, we did it. We tussled and like we like had a thing. And we really do need that. And it's just like we have, as I said, these two cats, which are now, we've locked in the snowstorm. We've been observing them closely. They will just go at each other. Yeah. Not violently, but they're just tussling around. One of them's got this cat jujitsu where they're holding one up and then hitting them with the back legs, and then they're like going around. One's bigger than the other, so he's got the weight advantage. The other's got like speed, and they're all just jumping off things and just surprise attacking each other. And it's like, and then they just cuddle all night in the same little hat on top of the cat tree, just and licking each other and cuddling. And we don't get that. We don't get that very often. And I think, particularly looking at the feminine, men actually get that a bit more because we have sports and we get into shit talking, even if we're playing golf. Yeah. Like the fun part about playing golf with your homies is the massive amount of shit that you're going to talk the entire time. And that kind of like banter is really necessary. And I think, for women who are athletes, and it's not all women, some women have that relationship where they get in the group, but that's, I think, important for all, male, female, whoever. It doesn't matter. Like to get in that thing where you're joking with each other, nothing serious, and you're fucking around and being physical. It's important.
Yeah. And the other side of that coin, as you're talking, what's making me think about it is, that moment in a ceremony where it's, especially one that is allowed, like I think you guys used to also do a style that was slightly less, stay on your mat where things are allowed to move around. But it's like people have been through the deep tunnel and now everyone is in the room together and there's like a silence that has fallen over the room. No one's trying to connect. No one's processing. No one's talking. There's just this silent group of people lying in an energy field together, like limbs a little bit over each other. Mm-hmm. And you feel that wordless dimension, like descending over it. And you realize that, that same camaraderie we find around the fire, that same camaraderie, we find it when we drop out of the wordless, the space of verbal together in those spaces. Yeah. And you actually find like, there's a way of being together that is largely being lost. And I don't know why it's being lost, but we're forgetting how to just be together at levels deeper than, like places where people aren't putting on any show,
Too much person, not enough animal.
Yeah, too much. That's it.
I mean, it's just, and we're getting more and more in our personhood.
We're much social, socialized patterning.
And we're just building our identity further and further. We have a public social identity through our social media. And then we have our social circle here. And then we have, okay, what's in our neighborhood or around our neighbors? And then what's in our work social identity? We have all of these identities that we're maintaining, all of our personhoods that we're maintaining. And everybody's their own personal brand. And so it's our livelihood. So it's tied into this. So it's all of these different things. But underneath all that, it's just we're all a bunch of animals.
Yeah. And maybe that's what the mystics knew. Maybe that's the final answer to the question, is at a certain point in any awakening, you have to go and be away from all of the voices of others and all of the voices of your own shoulds, how I should hold myself, so that you can be in an environment that starts to connect you with that silent knowing inside yourself. And maybe that's why they all went. Every one of them at a certain point. It's like, I can't get what I need here from more opinions, more different ways of doing it, more of my own ideas about it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had an incredibly potent mushroom ceremony, psilocybin ceremony, probably 3 years ago or so, when things were really challenging. And there was an incredibly clear message. And the message was, you got to go to Australia and you got to start on a walkabout and wind up at Uluru.
Wow.
And it's like,
pretty specific.
It was so specific. It was like, you've got to go do this. And I was like, whoa, like that is like very specific. And I was like, what do I do? He's like, just head out in that direction. You'll find your
purposeful
way.
action towards an unknown purpose.
Exactly. And I never did it, and but I've thought about it a lot. And I know that at some point I'm going to not have to, but I want to, like, I want to have that experience where I'm just headed towards something where I loosely know where I'm going, and just trust and like let it be. And I know that's going to be amazing medicine.
The lost art form of becoming, evolution.
Yeah. Well, man, do you have let's finish with a story. Let's finish with a story. Any story that you feel resonates and makes sense with anything we've been talking about, or anything you just want to talk about. Let's end with the story.
What's a good one? That crossing point that was just downstream, that crossing point rendered quite a lot of action because the animals would come down there to cross. And one afternoon I'm sitting on the point, and there was a little piece where the riverbank juts out. And what was amazing about it is you were able to look downstream and upstream at the same time. And the river is running east-west, so you get a beautiful sunset either side of it. And I was sitting there, and from behind me, walking down into the crossing point, comes a huge bull rhino. And rhinos have like a very particular energy to them. They have incredibly poor eyesight, very good hearing, very good sense of smell. And one of the great dangers of being around a rhino is he's not aggressive, but often he runs off in the wrong direction, and quite often towards what he's afraid of. He's just blind. It's like, danger, danger. And he starts heading off in your direction.
Horn first.
Yeah. And so mostly people get rolled over by rhinos because he ran off in the wrong direction. So as he's coming down towards me, I also have this thing where I always think that rhinos have like a few, maybe like 4 thoughts a day. If you watch them, if you spend a lot of time tracking and observing them, you go, hum, food. And then he'll go, sleep. And then he heads off. And it's not to like, as I said, it's not to like a random tree, a tree that he knows, a place that he likes to sleep. Sleeps there, wakes up, water. And then he heads to drink. And it's like beautiful to watch their rhythm. But anyway, he's coming.
The other one is sex.
Yeah. Female rhinos.
Yeah.
He's coming down towards me, and I was awkwardly positioned. So my options are move up the bank, but one minute I move, he's going to get me tapped on the ears, or like shuffle my ass back so that I'm just behind a tree, and so I go for the latter, and I just move ever so slightly. I get to the base of this tree, but it's tight as he comes down, and so it means that he's going to walk past me like you to me, and I'm sitting down, and when you're on the ground like that and a rhino walks next to you, it's like someone just drove a Sherman tank up next to you. And it's like his shadow fell over me, and the wrinkles on his face and the proximity. And I know that if he gets wind of me now, or if he gets a fright, there's a chance in just spinning around that he stands on me. And I couldn't help but have the thought, like, told everyone I was going into the wild to be like wild man in nature, and like day 3 Boyd got stood on by a rhino. He's back in the hospital, It's like you just had that little moment of like, this whole enterprise falls apart if I get like trampled by a rhino right now. But he came like directly past me, and he stopped for a moment, and he was testing the wind, and the breeze blew, and it was in my favor. Breeze is coming from him to me. And the way that time just expanded on the ground next to this huge bull rhino. And I felt that place of awe where you feel simultaneously absolutely tiny and really like a part of something vast at the same time. And then he walked down into the river, and immediately there was enough space. And I just sat still and I watched him. And I thought to myself, this experience is so deep for me now. I'm healing so many things. I'm in an encounter with nature that is absolutely transformative. But what does this experience mean in 20 years from now? In 20 years from now, when kids have grown up in screens, when there's virtual reality, what will it mean to have been someone who encountered a wild rhino, an animal that is getting, still to this day, massively poached and could go extinct at any time? What will it mean to be someone who lived alone in a wild place with wild animals in 20 years from now? I felt like there would be an opportunity at that phase of my life for a real eldership, chance that I had experienced something that, wow, we could be much closer to, or a long, long way away from in 20 years. We could get fully reset back to nature. And this whole human endeavor could have been a clearing in the forest, or we could be so far away from nature that we don't even, we're literally virtually dimensions away from it. And so I felt like I'm carrying some medicine now, and my work will continue to be in service of people becoming more natural, so that we can be more in tune with the natural world.
Oh,
yeah,
it's important. A Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. Amazing book. We talked about it on our last podcast, which I highly recommend anybody who hasn't listened to that.
Yeah, Lion Tracker's Guide to Life, and boydvarty.com. And, for people in your community who are doing work, we just launched our online retreat. And if anyone wants to be involved in the process of, learning the way of the tracker, it's a really powerful 8 modules that'll take you into identifying your track, tuning back into your body, becoming more instinctual, working out what you want to follow and where you want to go. And I think it's really good for people who are at any level who are looking to go inward and do their work.
At some point when all the travel restrictions and everything lifts, and we're in a different time than we are now, I'd love to first of all, go experience it myself, but then I think that's the first step. But then eventually, do some kind of retreat out there on the land and go experience some of the things that you're talking about, because it sounds incredible.
Come out, there's I also think that there's work to be done there that is really on a beautiful frontier of not only being in nature, but then working out how to open our consciousness to experience that nature more deeply. And so I think, it'd be a fun place to co-create on.
Let's do it.
Always enjoying being with you, man.
Yeah, brother.
Thank you.
Always, my man. Yeah. Always. This is great. Made it happen in the snowstorm of the century here.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And thank you to everybody tuning in on the Fit for Service Academy live stream. Thanks for tuning into the podcast with Boyd Varty. Make sure you check out his book, A Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. And once again, if you're looking for a community and looking to see what your sacred role in that community might be, go to aubreymarcus.com/tribe. Find out if you're the scout, the elder, the anchor, or the alchemist, or some combination in between. It's really fun, and I encourage you guys to check that out. I love you guys. I'll see you next week.